Hey everyone, Chang here and welcome to my channel. Now for today's video, I want to base it on this quote right here. When I first read it, I thought it was the most amazing quote ever. One that really needs to be emphasized a lot more when it comes to just solving problems in general. If you can't solve a problem, then there is an easier problem you can't solve. Find it. And the person who said it was Polya, probably not saying it correctly. Hopefully you guys can correct me on that, right? But the idea is actually extremely simple. We use this fundamental understanding in a lot of different things. For example, a recent trend in fitness industry is doing what we call complex movement or flow. A lot of that is actually just based on several foundational movement or simpler movement that once you master it and you start combining it, that's where this complex or flow comes in, right? The same goes with a lot of different things, and everything from building complex computer programs and of course to solving problems. It's very rare that we would have a completely new math problem with completely new strategies on how to solve it. Oftentimes, a more complex or a harder looking problem is a basic combination of a lot of fundamentals or easier subtopics, section, or whatever, right? So in that case, if you can isolate, if you can break it down into its different subsection and figure out which one is your weakness, which one you need to practice on, that will overall improve your game in problem solving. So let's look at some examples and then just get used to breaking them down. We're not solving them. We're just trying to break down different components so that we can isolate and see how these different components play together to make a more complex problem. So let's look at the first one. All right, so let's look at the first problem right here. We have simplify the expression so that there are no negative exponents. Of course, here's our expression and there are definitely negative exponents. Now, once again, we're not solving this. We're just trying to see different components that made up this more complex looking problem. So when you look at this, and let's just say based on the quote, you can't solve this. You have to ask yourself the question, what are simpler problems that I might not be able to solve? Or maybe there are problems that I am able to solve, I'm a little weak in it. So for example, if we're looking at this, well, some of the main things we can focus on is, well, negative exponents, right? Do I know what negative exponent means? Well, do I know what happens when there's negative exponents in the denominator of an expression, right? Do we know what happens when there are exponents with parentheses? And then exponents with the same base, exponents with different bases, right? There's a lot of smaller component that we have to focus on. How do we deal with it? How do we combine them? How do we basically get rid of these negative exponents, right? So the idea, well, let's just write it down so you guys can see it. We broke it down into more simplistic components or skills that we have to make sure we're strong on, right? Negative exponents. Right, we have to be comfortable with what that means, and we have to be comfortable with what happens if they are in the numerator, that means the top of the fraction, or the denominator, right? We have to be comfortable with distributing exponents, or basically what happens with exponent and when there are parentheses. So, parentheses with exponents. Right, we have to be comfortable with different base or same base of exponents. Different base of exponents, right? So just by noticing this, if we can't solve this problem, can we deal with negative exponents? Can we deal with them if they are in the numerator? Can we deal with them in the denominator? If we're strong in this, then move on, right? Can we deal with parentheses and in relation to exponents, right? If we are, good, let's move on. And once you realize that these are some of them, they might be even more simplistic components that I haven't listed out, but these are some of the main components. If you can solve all of these individual components and you're a master of it, then at this point you can see how they play a part in this more complex looking problem and begin solving it this way. So let's look at another problem and then practice breaking it down again to different components. So let's look at the second problem. The second problem doesn't give us much instruction, but it's pretty clear what they want us to do exactly with this problem. You have two of these, right? You're adding them together somehow and you want it as probably one coherent statement or answer. Well, in this case, it's actually, if you can solve it, fairly simple. If not, then now we can break it down into more simple components. So let's look at this. Well, first and foremost, what do we see? We see negative, right? Negative square root numbers. So we have to be comfortable with positive and negative and adding them. So basically square root arithmetic. I'm gonna shorthand it just so I don't have to write too much because I'm lazy, right? Square root arithmetic, right? We have to be comfortable with adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing square root. Okay, what else? Well, there's something very odd about this one. This one scares us because guess what? It's a square root of fractions. So we have to be comfortable with square root fractions. Fractions. Okay? And what else? Well, I mean, since we're working with square root and we know, hopefully, from experience whatsoever, we might be simplifying stuff, right? We might be taking stuff out of square root, or we might be putting stuff into square root, basically square root manipulation. So that's what? Distribution and factoring of square root. Slash factoring of square root. All right, what else? Well, let's see. We have square root fractions, we have the arithmetic, we have the distribution and factoring of square root. That looks like it might be it, right? There could be more. And guess what? If these end up being our weakness, we can always break it down further. That's the whole power of that quote, is that for that complex problem, if you can't solve it, there's an easier version that you probably can't solve or you're slightly weak upon. So if you're having trouble with square root arithmetic, right? Then what is it that's causing you trouble? Is it the square root? Is it the arithmetic? And is it because they have different bases, right? Is it different base, or is it because they have same base, right? If you're not comfortable with same base square root, that's a whole different thing. Now you just have to understand the concept of square root itself, even before you start manipulating it with arithmetic. That's the idea, right? You can always break it down to something further, something even more simplistic. But getting into the habit of doing that will greatly improve your skills in solving a more complex problem. Let's try one more that is very complex or scary looking, but actually not that bad. All right, so let's look at this one final problem, right? It looks super scary. You have two inequalities, you have variables on all sides. What do we do, right? It's asking for what is the solution? Well, in this case, we ask ourselves a question, right? All right, yes, it's scary. There's two inequalities. Is that something that we're not comfortable with? Is it the fact that there's multiple inequalities? Multiple inequalities, right? If it is, then, well, guess what? There are more simplistic ones where maybe there's only one variable and then you have multiple inequalities, right? Maybe there's a specific set of numbers here, specific set of numbers here, and the variable's in the middle, or, you know, different variations of it, right? Or is it the fact that there is a lot of these variables, right? There's variables on all sides. So it's the fact that there's multiple variables or variables on all sides, right? Variables on all sides. So what can we do in that situation, right? Well, guess what? We can actually look at more simplistic form. Maybe there are other ones where either variables are not on all sides, or we realize that it's a combination of two individual statements, right? That's another thing that we can look at. Well, what else? Is it that we're just scared of inequalities? If we're scared of inequalities, then that's something that we have to get comfortable with, like solving inequalities in general, right? Just solving. Let's just do solving right here. Inequalities, right? How is it related to maybe solving an equation? Or is it that, for example, maybe this one is a less than or equal is what scares us because we're so used to less than, right? There's so many ways to break this down. But then afterwards, as long as we can basically tell ourselves, convince ourselves, show to ourselves that we are a master in all of these small individual components, this problem shouldn't be so hard to solve. All right, so there you have it. Once again, this video is not about actually solving those problems. I'm sure you guys can. And if you can't, well, there's your task, right? Figure out what are your areas of weakness. Which easier variations, right? Smaller problems are you struggling with? Master those and then build up, see how they interplay, and then of course you get back to your more complex problem. And once again, this is a problem solving approach. While it seems obvious when you say it out loud, I feel like it's often ignored when we're just trying to teach ourselves or show others how to problem solve. Now, once again, this is math because it's a math channel, but this idea of breaking things down into easier variation, easier problems, their fundamentals applies to everything. Everything from fitness to computer science. Any problem that you encounter, There's always that approach. Once you master that approach, right, and you tackle any problem that you see with that kind of mindset, you're golden. You will definitely be able to solve those problems. Hopefully you find this video helpful. If you do, please like, comment, and subscribe. I will see you in the next video.